Want to thank you all. I would like to thank you all for joining me for the webinar Training Paraprofessionals as Job Coaches. My name is Janet Estervig, and I'm so glad you could join us for this webinar. I am re-recording the webinar. I had done it earlier this morning, and unfortunately, there was people having trouble getting in. So I am doing this again, and without any interruptions, and hopefully you will enjoy it, and I'm going to send it out to anybody who is interested in this recording and this training. Please send me an email and I will share my screen so you can see my email as well. And start the slideshow. There we go. So my email is janet@attainmentcompany.com, and I'll also show it at the end. And so please feel free to email me if you need a certificate of completion, a copy of the PowerPoint, or if you want to share this recording with anybody else. So I come to this information from a lot of experience. I have a master's in vocational rehabilitation. I'm also a registered nurse, but I was a high school special ed teacher as well. And I ran a supportive employment agency placing students and adults with disabilities in jobs. So all of my experience is really in teaching and training job coaches, and also knowing the best ways to support students and adults in jobs in the community. I'm also a registered nurse, and I did a webinar on Tuesday about supporting students with complex needs. So if you're interested in getting a copy of that, again, just email me. And that really talks about the supports that people might need, whether they're having any kind of physical challenges, physical barriers, have some limitations, or having some behavioral challenges as well. So I talked a lot about that, and really one of the things that I really think is important to prepare our paraprofessionals as job coaches is to really be prepared for almost anything, quite real, honestly, in the work settings. I also had experience running employment initiatives here in the state of Wisconsin, and I am now part of Attainment Company and wrote curriculum such as Pre-Employment Transition Solution. So I want to get into the content of what we're going to talk about today. So really a big part of all of this is building your team. So if you think about teachers and paraprofessionals, or even in adult service agencies, you're thinking about people who are doing maybe the job development part of it and people doing job coaching, it's so important to know that you are a team. And so in the end, it's really improving student outcomes. When they're working, they're going to gain some great experiences. It's so important that we're teaching them with that in mind. Also thinking about your paraprofessionals, everyone has different strengths, everyone has different gifts, and so you may want to think about matching those up even with a particular work setting. So if it's a work setting that has a lot of customer service, you're going to want to have paraprofessionals job coaching in those work settings that they're comfortable in as well. So knowing that there might be some additional training that they have as well might be some things to talk about, and this is going to be one of the trainings I think would be great for them. So many of you that were listening today were paraprofessionals, teachers, adult service providers, and possibly people with disabilities and family members. And so what the important part of this is, when a student is in a job, everyone needs to know what's the goal that you're trying to reach in for that student. What's on their IEP? What is it that we're trying to do for this, getting those work experiences? So being clear about that, and then really knowing that the whole purpose of this is really to teach our students how to be more independent. And then what are the roles? What are the teachers going to be doing? What are the paraprofessionals going to be doing? What's the role of the employer, the co-workers? We're going to talk about that today. So I look at a teacher's responsibility whenever they're providing support or training for paraprofessionals. Really, their job is planning out the assignments. Where are people going to be scheduled? They're monitoring or assessing their performance. They may be providing on-the-job coaching for the paraprofessional in teaching the job coach skills and teaching the work skills for the students. Obviously, you're going to want to be coming together, talking periodically, whether that's remotely or in person, and then that really helps build the strength that everybody's on the same page. And then really communicating well, what is your role as a paraprofessional in those work settings? Now, the paraprofessional's responsibility to the teacher and the team really is being very, very creative and adjusting to changes and needs. So a student might get a job and all of a sudden tomorrow you're going to be going to a restaurant setting. The next day you may be going to a factory setting. The next day a healthcare setting. So that's kind of the fun part of working as a job coach. You're in so many different work settings across the community. And so there is a real need to be flexible and to think on your feet. And it's so important that we're engaging those students to really learn the skills that they'll need for working in a community job. There may be some behavior plans that have all been established and that trying to follow and look at ways to follow those. You are going to be collecting data, and it's so important to really communicate back to the team what has been some challenges with that student. Here's some new opportunities at that job site. What are some experiences you're having? And then having an opportunity to share and discuss those. And again, the whole purpose of this is guiding that student toward learning independent skills. So when you're setting up the job, it might be different people doing this. So you might have an adult service agency doing the job development, finding the jobs for the students. The teacher might be doing it. Paraprofessional might be doing it. So how that's done is different in each school district or each community. But in the end, the initial meeting typically might be with the teacher and the employer. And so you're going to be talking about what it is the student's going to be working there. The employer's agreed to provide a work experience or hire that student for a part-time job. And typically it might be filling a regular job description, but also often it might be customized. So again, I've talked about customized employment in some of my past webinars, but basically what you're doing is pulling the skills of that student and matching them up with what employer might need for tasks done. So you're pulling the skills that student can do or learn and perform, and then being able to provide that niche in that business for getting those jobs done. Having established what your work hour is going to be, you're going to need to know what work permits based on the age of the student. Maybe there might be some consideration in your state law about what students between 16 and 18 can do or under 16. So just knowing what those are. Then it's so important that you gather the family, the student, the transition teacher, and the paraprofessionals together to really talk about here's the job coming up, here's the expectations of this job, and really building that family support, because part of this is they have to be sending to the school or when they're going to a job the right food that they can eat there, the clothing, the hygiene, not taking days off on work days, trying not to schedule doctor's appointments during times when that student's working. So having this conversation about the importance of the job for that student. And then talking about what's the first day? What are we going to expect on that first day? Here's what the student needs to bring. And so just starting to build that and having that conversation with the student as well. They may have some anxiety or concerns about what's going on or what's going to happen next. So the roles are important to establish too. Again, good communication. Who's going to do what? So who's going to complete a task analysis of that job? Maybe it's going to require video, maybe it's going to require photos. Who's going to talk to the employer, learning about those job expectations, what are company policies, and who's going to take that student on the first day on their job? Maybe the student's already, typically the student's already been there, met the people during a job interview or an initial meet and greet, filling out forms. But when they first start on the job, really knowing who's going to get that started. And then developing this plan to support the students. So I'm going to give you a copy of what would be like a task analysis. And what you would lay out, here's maybe the schedule for the student. I usually like to have it in writing or pictorial if the student struggles with reading, and really helping them to see exactly what their day is going to look like, their work day or their work time, if it's an hour or 2 hours or all day, whatever it turns out to be. So creating that plan, and in there you're going to be putting in what kind of prompts and cues you might be using. I'm going to talk about that too a little later in this webinar. And the whole idea is really promoting as much independence as possible. Obviously, really important to be communicating between the teacher and the paraprofessional. You might develop a system of reporting each day. At the end of the day, doing a quick email, here's what happened. Maybe you're going to have forms that they'll fill out electronically, but however the data is tracked, it's just still important for that daily or weekly communication. So the job coach's role, or the paraprofessional, is really understanding this this slide has a lot of information on it. I'm going to explain to you. It's so important to understand the philosophical approach of supporting students in the job. The idea here is that this is the student's job. Your role is to teach that student the skills for them to do that job as independently as possible. And this is the hard part, not to overteach or not to overprompt, because we all so often want that student to be successful, and of course we do. But if that student is struggling a little bit, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to jump in and help them do this. I'm going to jump in and get the job done. And you really want that student to understand the scope of that job and only jump in when you're needed. Of course, you need to provide the support and training when it's needed, but not when it's not needed. And I'm going to show you how you can kind of track some of that. So important. The student now is in a job setting. It should not be this teacher to student or parent to child relationship. It should be adult to adult. You're going to have adult expectations of the student because they're now in a work setting, and that's what you want the coworkers to look at that student as another adult or young adult, another person that's an employee of that work setting. And so how you communicate, how you treat that student is so important to build that adult to adult relationship. So communication is really critical. So of course, communication is important when the teacher and paraprofessional are talking, but also when you're talking to family, keeping them informed on how things are going, having the employer and the student having conversations and coworkers so that there's relationships starting to be developed, and then how you're asking questions of the employer, having a conversation, how you think things are going, is the quality, the expectation you have, are there any things that we need to relay that I can do better in teaching the student. So then, number 4, it's so important to build that coworker and student experience. So you don't want the coworkers to come to you as a job coach. You want them to go to the worker, their coworker, to talk about what they need to have done next, to give feedback. So you're the support person, but it should be a triangle conversation. The conversation needs to happen between either the supervisor or coworker with the student worker. And so you're there to help translate. Sometimes it might mean that you have to break the request down into a simpler list. You might want to only give one thing at a time, or you might be helping give feedback to the coworker, modeling them at how they could approach giving instructions. So it really still in the end is developing those relationships, because if you're not there, the whole idea is as you fade out of the setting, whether you leave the job site or whether you're leaving or fading out of that support, in the end, you want that the student to go to the coworker and to ask them, oh, where do I put this? What should I do now? You know, you want that relationship to be developed, because that's how you fade your support. The student experience. The purpose of a work experience for a student really is to develop soft skills and work skills. So you are not just there as a job coach to teach that student, okay, you got to get this job done and this job done, and this is how you fill this thing, and this is how you clean this table, and this is how you make this bed. That's all fine. Those are skills, but that student needs to understand the world of work. And so those are soft skills. So they need to know reliability is extremely important. Teamwork is so important. How they look, smell, their dress code, hair has to be combed, teeth have to be brushed. Really, all of those really important key soft skills are what employers are looking for, and having a positive attitude. So when an employer is looking for employees, they love to see these good soft skills. They're willing to teach and train the actual work skills, but building those soft skills into the teaching that you do are critically important. And then helping the student understand how to self-monitor. So how do I know I've done enough? I don't want to have that student worker have to rely on you, the job coach, to know, have I done enough of this? Is this good enough? So instead you're going to go, well, what do you think? How many are you supposed to have done in an hour? Well, I don't know. Well, let's have this written down. Maybe we need to put this somewhere. Maybe you need a timer, or a clicker to count how many times that's been done. Maybe, how does it look? Does it look clean to you? Yeah, it looks good to me. Well, maybe, what would you say if I said, I don't think it's quite what the employer expects? Well, what do you mean? Well, look, and what do you think? So keep asking questions. And then, of course, point out what they need to do, but try to get the student to think for themselves about what is it that's not right? Because then they're going to be able to put this into their long-term memory of, these are the things I need to look for. Sometimes we even take photos and then we have an arrow in the photo that we show, this is the area you need to concentrate on with that particular task. So really, we're talking about growing independence for that student. Really need to understand what the employer is expecting. Sometimes they need to get things done fast. So the top quality might go by the wayside because it needs to be done faster. Or they don't care how long it takes, it's got to be done perfectly right. So you don't know. Every employer, it depends on the job, will tell you those expectations. And then really important to build those social connections. That's critically important for students to know who their coworkers are and start to get to understand the importance of social skills. So here's what a job coach is going to be looking at. Knowing the work, so the position, have you conducted a task analysis? Do you know the list of tasks that have to be done in which order? Sometimes I've taken pictures of tasks and then the employer each morning would put the pictures in order of how they wanted those jobs done that day, because it changed every day. Sometimes we have a calendar that shows every Monday and Wednesday you do these tasks, every Thursday and Friday you do these tasks. The procedure, sort of that's that task analysis. I'll show you a form that I've used, really to look at, this is what you have to follow, but this is you in your teaching methods, what you will be following. And then cultivating those relationships. I want the coworkers to be able to say, hey, John, that job, you've got to finish this, you didn't finish it all the way. I don't want to be the one to have to say it. Now, maybe I have to prompt the coworker and say, can you tell John that he was supposed to do this, this, and this task, and he only did 3 of the 5? And the coworker goes, yeah, I'm happy to do that. Because again, sometimes that goes along much farther than the job coach. So really cultivating those relationships. And then preparing for that first day. So if you can get into the work setting prior, this isn't always practical and it doesn't always work, but if you can, this is what we try to do, is go in, write up a task analysis, talk to the employer, find out their expectations, put in detail what you expect the student's going to be doing that day, and then maybe take pictures along the way of what has to be done. You might capture in a video the steps of what they have to do for punching in, so the student can watch that before the first day of the job. You might have, again, pictorial or written schedules that show exactly when the breaks are, or lunchtime or ending time. So developing checklists, I love checklists. And there's a lot of apps now that you can find that do this as well. So there's an example of step-by-step videos. You're going to be maybe showing pictures to show the steps, but this is going to evolve, because obviously what's going on the first day on the job is going to look entirely different after a week or 2 or a month of training. Also, you're going to want to be tracking data. Typically for IEPs, you need to show progress for that student. What progress are they making on that work setting? So thinking about that, the paraprofessional is going to be going to potentially several different job sites. Sometimes you might be filling out paper evaluations that go back each week. Maybe they're shared with family, or you might have a Google form that the paraprofessional fills out that gets emailed. Maybe there's reports that are emailed out to the parents, student, teacher. I really like that there's communication to the parents about how jobs are going. Again, we're building that support for employment for students. So just developing them and determining how often they should be shared. Have this conversation between the teacher and the paraprofessional as far as what is required. So who is going to actually do the training plan? Who transports the student? Are they going to ride a bus? Are they going to be transported? Who maintains this time that you're going to get together to meet? Where are you going to record it? Who's going to send notes home? So having these discussions about whose role is it really is helpful. So we already talked about this. What does the employer need to tell us? And we have to ask these questions. Employers, this is their job, this is their business, so they may not even see and understand what kind of things you're asking. So making sure that you're clear, or maybe you're going to talk to a coworker who's been doing that job for a long time. They may have tips and ideas that can have that job can be done more efficiently. And then it's important that the employer and the coworkers know what your role is. Often I'll have coworkers going, you know, what are you doing? Who is that person following that worker? You know, they don't really know what that role is. I think more and more now that we have job coaches in the work settings, people are knowing what a job coach is, but regardless, there'll be places that have never had a job coach or a student working there. So explain that the goal is we really want the student to be as independent as they are able. We really want to teach them important skills so that when they graduate from high school, they are going to have these work skills. And then really talk about that, how important, if anything, any issues arise, it's so important that we're in there, help brainstorm ideas to really either salvage the work setting, site, or maybe decide that that student needs to have a natural consequence, which would be being fired. So what is the workplace culture? So sometimes you may not know this right when you're going to be placing a student there, but this is thinking about all the different workplace cultures people have. Now I want you to think back all your jobs when you were in high school or even after, and think about what was the culture like? Was there goofing off? Was it really strict? Was the culture in an office setting? Was it in a factory setting? And so were people talking all the time to each other, friendly? Was nobody talking to anyone? You know, every place, and think about your places you've worked. The culture is different in every place. So students typically aren't going to catch on to all of this. It's so part of it is how can we influence? So there's unwritten rules. And the students aren't going to know what those unwritten rules are. You actually may not know what the unwritten rules are in the beginning. That's why you start building this camaraderie with the coworkers, because you don't want to break the rules. So the rule is nobody can have a soda or water even at their desk. Maybe because somebody had wrecked a computer once before. You know, I don't know. So there may be rules that you just want to find out. And then what are the expectations of the social skills? So here's, you know, looking at a workplace culture. So you've got the organizational culture profile, and how are they across there? You might have a work setting that is not stable at all. There's people coming in and out. They're hiring people every week. It's high turnover. Or you might have a work culture, the people in that office are always the same. They've been there for 25 years. So it's very, very different. And that really, some of your students do well in one and some do well in another. It's not good or bad, because it depends on the student, their own personality. Are they someone who likes a lot of change and different people, and is that a pretty good idea? Or is it where they need a real structured environment? So really, how do people interact? Who can you talk to your neighbors? How much can you talk? So this is important because some of our social skill issues for our workers that I've trained over the years, they get talking too much. They're walking, there's a meeting going on, and they open the door and say, "Good morning," because they're very friendly. But it's the CEO's meeting, you know, with their board. No, you can't walk in there. That's an unwritten rule. Is it written anywhere? No. But really understanding the social norms of that workplace, and then making sure your dress code fits that. And I mean the job trainer too, because it's so important that you're blending in as well to that work setting as the worker. When are breaks allowed? Do you have a place to store your lunch? What are rules about cell phones? You've got to find that out. And then is there, if the student needs assistance in the restroom, is there some place for some privacy? Do they have separate stalls? If not, I have a sign that I would put on the door saying, "Female assisting male in restroom." And sometimes the sign on the door doesn't usually work much because people don't really read them always. So I have actually used a tripod, a cardboard tripod that says, "Female assisting male in restroom will be out shortly. Thank you for your patience." And I put it right in front of the door. If there's any medication storage needs, know what those might be for that student, and then make sure that their medications are all clearly labeled. Speaking of labels, I always bring this one in because I truly think it's so important. Label jars, not people. Don't talk to the coworkers about that student's disability label. It doesn't matter what their label is. Yeah, that's an autistic kid. That's a Downs over there. You know, people use these terms and they don't mean it to be mean, but it's not okay. And we have to model the best way to talk about people with disabilities. So even listen to your own language. Are you talking about people with a disability? And that this article is so important. Just check your language, because if you're talking about the student in terms of their disability, then we're losing the sight of this is a person first. So I love the idea of sharing, and we use social stories to share, but the idea is that you share about Janet. Janet loves to travel. She lives with her 97-year-old mother, and she likes to play the piano, and you just come up with a bunch of stuff about me. And that's what to share. And I get to talk to my coworkers about that if I'm able. So those are things you want to share, not the fact that I might that about me and my disability. I don't want to be identified that way. So here's some job coach do's and don'ts. So I know sometimes you're not supposed to say the don't, but I'm going to anyway, because here's the do's. Use all the protocols followed by every other employee of the business when you're going in and out. So if you have to sign in as a visitor, as a job coach, you've got to follow that protocol. If you're allowed to come in the employee entrance, the student, of course, is going to, but now maybe you're just coming in to check on that student. They're doing pretty well independently. So you got to know it. Do you have to wear name tags? You got to find out what is it that you need to do. And then, like I say, never just assume you can just walk into the business, because other people may not know who you are. Always come in and remember, we want to be very professional. So that means that we have to blend in with our own communication style. So don't talk too loud. When you're giving instructions, don't say, it's time to go to the bathroom, you know. Don't say those things out loud, that loud. Okay, if it's time to go to the bathroom, then have the student, because you're there to provide that personal care maybe. So, and you want to use the restroom now, okay? Yeah, I'm here to help you. All right, but it's privacy, it's professional. And then I'm going to tell the story about we had a high school, I ran a personal care agency. And so there was a local high school, and it's an office setting, a very professional office setting, a very big one. We had about 1,000 workers out in the community. And so we needed training materials put together, and it was going to be like a work experience for the students to come in, and we're a nonprofit, so that worked out okay. So they would come in, and the students were fine. The job coach or the paraprofessional that came in was wearing totally inappropriate office attire. You know, stocking cap, jeans with holes in it, and I'm sure he looked really cool. I mean, it's probably a cool guy, but it was not appropriate in the office setting. And I talked to him about this, because really, you have to blend into those work settings wherever they happen to be. So think about that. Oh, and there was one more on that slide. I got to take that. Employees of the workplace are actually the coworkers of your student. They're not your coworkers. And this is tough, because job coaches often never even see each other, and you're out in the community and you're a little bit more isolated. And so, but remember that the important relationships you're developing are the relationships between the student and their coworkers. And that is their coworkers. So just remembering that. Of course, you want to have friendly relationships with people at the work settings. So being respectful and age-appropriate language, think about what you might be saying in a classroom. It should not sound the same as in a work setting. The work setting, the classroom is a teacher-student relationship. I get that. But when you're in a work setting now, I said before, adult to adult, don't use any educational human service jargon. Nobody in that work setting knows what an IEP is, or DVR, Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, or CP, or IDD, or OT, or PT, and we have so many. I'm sure you got tons more. Don't ever use that jargon, especially, and remember, don't only label jars, not people. Don't use these abbreviations about your student, whether about their disability or anything. And then if you're developing some adaptations, or sometimes we look at reasonable accommodations for students from the business, try to make sure that blends in the best as possible. We talked about being non-intrusive when supporting, trying to stay out of the way. That sometimes can be a challenge if you're helping to teach a skill in a small setting, small work area. Be clear about what you want to do, and that's going to be our task analysis. And always be on time, because your timeliness and reliability may be reflected on that student, could jeopardize their job. So again, dress appropriately. You're teaching towards independence. And even if sometimes you may never leave the work site, maybe you have several students there and that's where you're going to be, as still you want to have that student be as independent as they're able. And then looking at reasonable accommodations when appropriate. We've done a lot of interesting little accommodations to make the student be able to do the job more efficiently. All right, so I'm going to say do nots. Every single one of these was done by one of my job coaches. That's why I'm saying this. I didn't make this up. So one of the things is dress appropriately for that work setting. Really important. You can't be sitting there listening to music when other people are working. Now, maybe if other people are listening to music, but not your own. So you can't be sitting and reading a book. You can't be knitting, napping. I know that seems obvious, but I had a job coach who laid down on the couch and fell asleep. The employer took a picture of her and emailed it to me. Now, that's embarrassing as an employer. So texting, talking. My pet peeve is when somebody is providing personal care, like maybe feeding somebody at a work site or even out in the mall, and they're on their phone and texting and just, not really paying attention to the student or adult. And that's rude. It's plain rude. So don't sit in an unapproved area, restricted areas. Don't interrupt other people's work. So because as you're fading out your support, you have less and less to do. That's right, and that's good. But now you're thinking, well, I should be doing something. So you're going to do more than you need to for that student, or you're going to want to read that book or go on Facebook, and you can't do those things. You must look professional. You must look professional. Other people are watching. You are in a fishbowl. And that fishbowl is everybody's watching what you're doing. And you are the role model on how to interact with a person with a disability, quite honestly. So we want you to really think about your job in a professional way. Don't forget about HIPAA. We have to be careful about that. Sometimes people ask all sorts of questions. And again, usually it's out of curiosity, and said, I need to respect Janet's privacy, just like I know you'd want your privacy respected. But, I think Janet would love to talk to you and meet you. Would you like to go and meet her? That's really what we're talking about here. So this whole process is about communication. And I think about this active listening and communication. How are you communicating? Is the message you're delivering the message that's been received? And you're only going to know that by doing things like when you're listening to what the employer says or the student's saying to you or a coworker, and you're saying, okay, I don't know if I got that right, but I'm embarrassed to ask, then just restate. Just say, so it sounds like, so you're saying I should go and get the supplies then in the cabinet by the office, did you say? And, but clarify, because it's so important to clarify, be specific. Make sure when you give information that you're doing the who, what, when, where, why, and try to not have distractions when you're talking to the student, and making sure they're having good eye contact if they're able to do eye contact, because we always have some students that's difficult for them. So just thinking about how you can make sure the student's getting it. Have them repeat back to you what you've just said. Or the coworker just told them to do something and say, well, John, did you get that? Can you tell me what you need to do now? And ask the question. John will go, well, yeah, I'm supposed to go to the closet next to, where was it? So now you're clarifying, and that's great. So are you listening? Again, focused, concentrating, and asking. And then if that student has any kind of augmentative or alternative communication, like a Go Talk Now or some kind of communication device, it's so important. And even sometimes it's just pictures, a notebook, a small, like wallet with pictures that they're pointing to. Whatever their communication device is, make sure the coworkers learn about it, learn how to use it with that student, and are comfortable with it. It doesn't do any good if people are just uncomfortable with that. So during break time, say, okay, Janet, why don't you pull out your Go Talk and let's show them the cool stuff you can do with this, so you can talk to them and then start building that rapport and making people very comfortable with that device. All right, so now let's talk about systematic instruction and a task analysis. It is the best way to teach a skill. You're breaking down the task into manageable, teachable steps, and that's the whole purpose behind this. So how does your student learn? How does the employee learn? So maybe you had done some things with them in the past. What's some best methods? Is a lot of verbal talking going to throw them off, or they're not going to catch what you're saying? Is it better to just use one word? Is it better to use short sentences? Is it better to give just one instruction at a time? Is it better to show a picture at the same time you're giving an instruction? What works for that student? And then, do you need any adaptations or ways that that student can do that job more independently? So what impacts learning for that student? We know this in education very well. We know that students have different learning styles, the environment the student's in matters, and even how they perceive it and their personality. So you think about what impacts that student learning when you're delivering the messages to teach that student the task that they're going to be doing on a job. So the benefits of this, of doing a task analysis, is that you're developing a plan that both the job coach and the employee that's doing the work will know how to do their job and do it well. So this is going to show when the job coach is going to intervene and with which prompt. And then you can track this to know where is that student now being independent and where do they still need some additional support. So keeping these really good records, not only for you, the job coach, and to share with the teacher, but also this is important if you have multiple job coaches. Typically you'll have at least 2 people who may go into that same work setting, maybe more. And so you want to be consistent in that training. And so it really is the nuts and bolts of teaching. And what level of prompt you're going to use does matter. And I'm going to show you the prompts. You want to use the least intrusive, always. All right, so you're going to record the steps. One task might have steps, or the student might just need a list of tasks that they're going to do that they can just check off. So it really depends. But quite often, you may have 2 of the 3 jobs, for example. 2 of the jobs the student is getting, they just have a checklist, they can check it off. The 3rd job is they're struggling to learn. That's the one maybe you put a detailed task analysis together where you're going to put step by step how to get that one task done. All right, I'm going to show you. So here's the a prompting hierarchy. It's just one example. There are other ones, and some have these in different places. It isn't as much about that as about the fact that you really think about which prompt you're going to use. So you may be starting with the full physical prompt up to partial. So that means that I'm actually hand over hand with the student, letting them know exactly what I'm doing. And so that student can tell, maybe you're learning to how to apply pressure in wiping down a table. That feels there's a certain pressure point, or maybe how to sweep. How do you do those movements? How do you vacuum? How do you fold the sheets? You might be doing hand over hand. Then you work up to, hopefully a coworker could model the job for you, that student, or I'm going to model and show them how to do the job and then have them do it. And I might do that in different ways. Maybe I'll have them do the last part of the job. Maybe I'm going to have them do the whole job, that task, but that's modeling. Then gestures are just pointing out things. So you're pointing out, like, don't forget to get that part of the room, or I'm trying to not use verbal prompts, but I'm using gestural prompts. That actually could be farther up on the hierarchy, I think. But then the verbal prompt. Okay, this is the one we use the most. And it isn't always the most effective, but we use it all the time because it's what we're most comfortable with. We're talking, we're teaching. And so we have the direct and indirect. So a direct verbal prompt is one, yes, you see the bottom one had a different list. You have a direct verbal prompt, and that is can put the plates into that rack, or wipe down that table, or whatever your direct verbal prompt. This is what we always do. We tell students what to do. But an indirect, and I always ask that you move to an indirect prompt, and that is, what do you need to get next? Do you think that is that job done? Where do you find those supplies? Who do you have to go to ask? So getting the student to think of the answer, to know what to do next, builds that into their long-term memory. It builds that knowledge so that they can be more independent as they're moving through their job tasks. So don't give them the answer. Hold back, ask a question. Of course, eventually you may have to give the answer, but maybe instead of giving the verbal prompt, you tap on something. And so then the next thing is sort of, you can see, I actually like the prompt hierarchy that's on the bottom there. So the next thing would be sort of, being close. So you're there watching, observing, making sure the student's doing the job well, and then you just intervene when you need to. Now, visual pictures, using checklists, using the phone for checklists, maybe having things printed out. Now it's so easy to do all of that. You might even have short videos that the student has, or maybe they get verbal prompts through a video. So, and then the least intrusive are basically the natural cues that already exist in that work setting. You don't need to do anything. So the customers get up from that table and leave. That's a natural cue to go and take care of that table. Don't tell the student to do it yet. Of course, after this is some training, they know. Wait to see, will they do that? And before a verbal direct prompt, you can say, what do you need to do? Ask them. Have them look around. Oh, that table, the customers have left. So trying to build that now ability to think through the next steps. And here's some definitions. All right, so here's the task analysis form that I put together. And so basically all you see here is the steps of the task. Now you're going to break down, this again would be for those jobs that the students just maybe struggling with. So you write down that task, a plus or a minus. Did they do that part of the task? I broke it all down into small steps. Yes, they were independent. No, they couldn't do it. So when they couldn't do it, what instructional strategy am I going to use? Am I going to use an indirect verbal prompt, or am I going to use hand over hand, or am I going to use a gesture? What am I going to use? So it's thinking about the type of prompt. Maybe there's an adaptation that could be developed to make this easier for me to do this job. Right, so here's a sample. I just did making a sandwich. I had a guy who worked at a nursing home, and so he had to make hundreds of sandwiches. And of course, they all had to be consistent and the same. So basically, we would write down all the different steps in his job, and then we thought about what did I do it by myself? Yep, plus. No, I didn't get the right amount of butter on the knife, and no, I didn't spread it evenly. Matter of fact, the bread sometimes even ripped because I put too much pressure on it. So I could use verbal prompt. I could use a physical assist for that pressure. I could model it for him. But one of the things we found, it was to come up with an adaptation, to use a spatula instead of a knife. And we actually ended up having the butter partially melted, so then he could butter the bread very efficiently, very easy, with just some simple adaptations. But now I'm going through this. Here's another example. I'm going through the steps of making a sandwich. It's a cheese sandwich. There's pluses and minuses. The plus with the parentheses said I could do it, but I'm not doing it at the right timing, because if it takes that long to pull out 2 slices of bread, what's a more efficient way of doing it? Maybe I can write down some ideas and ways to be more efficient about this. And then I can use an instructional prompt. So basically the idea is when you write up this task analysis, it's going to keep looking different, because each week there are probably going to be changes in this. And so, okay, now I should never prompt that student on the tasks that were plus, independent. Nothing, zip, mouth clamped. Your proximity is there, you're standing there, but you're not going to do anything until they get down to maybe opening the butter container or whatever. then you're thinking about, okay, which prompt am I going to use? Now, maybe again here we may decide to have an adaptation for it. So then, yes, independent. So this is the idea, is that you're building your training where it's needed and don't train where it's not needed. I'll send you a copy of that task analysis as well. So part of it is also building that self-monitoring for students. You want the students to know what it is that they are doing correct or incorrect, and then they can say, oh, no, this isn't right. Why isn't it right? Let's see. Oh, I know why. So you're going to be telling them why it's not right initially, but eventually you're not going to be telling them anything, because the idea is they can figure this out for themselves. So sometimes you might be using, you know, smartphones, videos, pictures, check-off lists. You might text the job coach and say, I finished this job, and the job coach can text back saying, well, it's 3 o'clock, you should be already at this point. So that we talk about remote job coaching as well. And then also consistent training. One of the important things that we looked at when we were training students that had more significant disabilities was that we would videotape the trainer that was really good with that student, who really caught the cues, was giving the right instructions, and we videoed, with permission of course, that trainer and that student in the job. And then we had other job coaches watch that video to see how they interacted with that student, how that proved to be successful. So really having opportunities to get that consistent training is really, really important. So communication. So we're talking also now about remote job coaching more and more in the field. And this is really just having a way, again, cell phones have to be okay to be in that particular work setting. Conversation with the employer, of course, to see if this is okay. But we would have one of our workers would be checking in with the job coach, and she'd go, they do a FaceTime, and you can do it with either Android or iPhones, it doesn't matter. And then they'd say, I'm now at this point in my job, and they go, well, I see what you've done? And so they can actually turn the phone around and show the tasks that they've completed, or maybe even talk to their supervisor, and the supervisor says, yeah, they're having a great day today. They got all this, and this done. And so you look back, and that's a job coach contact. Instead of, we provided support in rural communities. So it could be a 45-minute drive just to see how a student's doing. And we could now have daily check-ins with that student or that adult with disability working in that job by not having to drive out there. And then you can also do like Google Hangouts, where job coaches come together and the teacher and the paraprofessionals can talk. YouTube job coaching, recording a job coaching, and you can have private playlists, so only the job coaches can watch that YouTube. So it's a way to share videotapes, for example, with each other. There's apps now, a lot of apps, and you're going to, I'm not as techie as some people, but there's so many things that you can do now, and get connected to anybody in high school, and they can help you figure out how to make best use of apps. And there's some more device apps. So really the idea here is to give ample opportunity. Really, we want to develop these positive relationships with the worker and with the student. I don't want the coworkers to just see the disability. I want them to see beyond that. I don't want them to have stereotypes about people who happen to have this disability or that disability. I want them to know Janet. This is Janet. And that's really so much a part of the role that we play as job coaches. I want them to see that student as a competent employee. I want that social acceptance to happen the best that it can. And I want to build this network and potential friendships, if not just within the workplace. And then always reflecting that people with disabilities can be competent employees. So even if your school has any marketing materials that you give to businesses, look at those materials. Do they show students as competent employees, students working in jobs? And also, I'm a real strong believer, personal care should never be a barrier. So often what happens is a student might need some personal care, whether it's in the restroom, they may need assistance in eating, whatever it might be that they need. It shouldn't be a barrier to employment. People can get those supports in the work setting. You have to figure out the privacy, think about whether the student might have a need for, catheterizations that they do themselves. Just how are you going to wrap up all those materials? We've done everything to support a person, regardless of whatever they needed in jobs. And so my Tuesday training on supporting students with complex needs gets more into lots of detail about personal care. So also many students may not want to jeopardize their Medicaid funding. And if not, that means, yes, they can still work. You can still work and get Social Security benefits. So there is an income limit for some, and others, they're going to lose some of their benefit as they work. But it depends on if they're an SSI, SSDI. That's another whole training. But really understanding that you can work, just know what those income limits might be. And then sometimes when I had a student that needed a lot of personal care and midday, we looked at work settings where that would be appropriate. So we had Paul working at an assisted living nursing home combination. And so there were places, private places within that company that it was fine for me to be able to get him out of the wheelchair. And we really thought about what we could use within that business, and again, with all the permission from them to help provide that support. So when you're thinking about personal care, think about when you're going to schedule it, where is a good location, is there private restrooms? If not, don't use the restroom during the busiest time at lunchtime when everybody else is. You don't want you want that bathroom to be freed up for the other workers. Maybe you can have a little cabinet in that bathroom for supplies. And then just knowing about emergency protocols of that business. Here's a big one. When they have a fire drill or the power goes out, you just want to make sure that you know what the process is within that business, and making sure if you're not there and the student's working there, that somebody is going to be checking to make sure. Because a student, even when they hear something, even if they've practiced, they may still freak out and not know what to do with the sound, that sound of the fire drill, for example. So the process is there's always going to be people there that know this is what I have to do, go and check on John and make sure that John's safe as well. And then just all the procedures for entering and exiting. So this is my thing. Having a job does matter. You're helping students find jobs, get these work experiences, meeting their goals. I believe everyone can work regardless of their level of disability. And I think that in the end, this is what we're trying to do, is to give students that, that opportunity for success, so that when they leave high school, they're going to be successful in the world of employment. And what matters most is how you see yourself. Students see other people working. They want to be working too. They want to have jobs. So anything we can do towards that end is so important. So here is my contact information. My email, janet@attainmentcompany.com. If you need a certificate of participation after watching this, email me and I'm happy to send you one. I can also send you a copy of this recording and of course a copy of the PowerPoint. I hope that this was informational for you and you enjoyed it, and I so appreciate you being part of this training with me. And I do have 5 others that you might be interested in as well. So if you're interested in getting a link to all of the webinars, just let me know and I'm happy to send that to you. So I am going to stop the recording, and thank you very much. I so appreciate it, from Wisconsin and Attainment Company. We're so happy to sponsor these webinars for you. Thank you.